Hello and welcome to the Capitol Report on NTD Television. I'm Steve Lance. Amid reports that the downed objects could just be civilian balloons, the White House today defending Biden's decision to fire missiles at them. This as Biden's expected talks with Xi Jinping draw attention. NTD's Iris Tao brings us more.
Questions are mounting after President Biden says the three unidentified objects downed last week
were most likely balloons tied to private companies, recreation, or research institutions.
But are we going to find out what they actually are? The White House told me on Friday, probably not. Will the American public eventually find out what these three unidentified objects are, including which companies they belong to or which specific benign purposes they had?
We would like nothing better, but I can't sit here and promise you that we'll get to that level of fidelity of detail. Going to be very difficult to find them, let alone once you find that debris, be able to do the forensics to identify it. So.
John Kirby adds that the one downed in Alaska ended up on sea ice in Arctic conditions, and recovery teams have not been able to mount anything on the ice to find the debris. And there's a similar fate for the object downed in Canada's Yukon Territory.
Thick wilderness.
And the one that fell over Lake Huron.
Again, in very deep water. I think the Canadians have decided that they're not going to look for it anymore.
This as some lawmakers are questioning, if we knew so little about these objects, why shoot them down in the first place?
There are reportings, though, coming out that they are just mere hobbyist balloons that may have been worth as little as $12. And it seems like we missed the big balloon and let the other three that were not a threat, we shot them down.
The White House on Friday defending Biden's decision.
I'd ask you to, just for a second, put yourself in his shoes, especially certainly in light of the Chinese spy balloon.
Meanwhile, attention is growing as Biden says he'll be talking to China's Xi Jinping. And to ask the White House today, will President Biden bring up human rights issues with Xi Jinping?
The president never fails to bring up human rights concern. And when he met with President Xi in Bali, he brought it up then. The president believes that you have to lead with your values, particularly in foreign policy. He's never shy about bringing that up.
The White House says the U.S. has not formally extended a request for Biden to talk with Xi, but notes that it will happen. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
And to help us better understand the situation with the Chinese spy balloon, we sat down with Dr. Tom Lynch, a distinguished research fellow at the Center for Strategic Research of the National Defense University. He'll help us place the balloon incident into proper context of the Chinese regime's broader ambitions. Tom Lynch, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, delighted to be here today, and let me just say, again, as I have in the past, that I'm here to represent my own research and analysis and not necessarily those opinions of the Department of Defense, the National Defense University, or the U.S. government.
Thank you for that disclaimer, Tom. Really appreciate it. Tom, I'm really curious to get your thoughts over all that's transpired over the past couple of weeks when it comes to the Chinese spy balloon. There's a lot of, talk in the headlines. Take us beyond the headlines, the sensationalism. Is this serious, and just how serious is it?
I think what we're seeing now here with the Chinese balloon, and particularly with some statements on both sides of the rivalry since principally October of 2022. And your listeners and audience may recall that October 22, was the Chinese Communist Party convention, and this is where President Xi anchored himself for a unprecedented third five-year term. And shortly after that, President Xi allowed press clippings worldwide to show that he spent a lot of time talking about military modernization, about the need for the Chinese military to even accelerate its advancement into a modern military. And I think you've seen some of the echoes of that over the last 2, 3, 4, 5 months, as we in the United States have said, all right, there is a sense of urgency for some reason on the part of Xi, and there are movements in the Chinese military that suggest they may be interested in being more provocative going forward. Our response then is to be more attentive to what they are doing that is provocative, and I think to send more signals to say we are not just going to accept the provocations. We are going to be adjusting our military and our framework to say to you, you cannot intimidate us or our partners and allies in the Indo-Pacific region, particularly because we are going to compete with you.
Now, looking at what took place through the CCP's lens from start to finish, from when the balloon took off to when it got shot down. Are they looking at the whole process, do you think, as a net positive, even though the balloon was ultimately taken down, both in terms of intelligence gathering and the reaction from the United States? Or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'll amplify that I do not read or write Chinese, so I don't have the ability personally to kind of see what they're writing or saying about it. I have terrific colleagues at National Defense University who are in the Center for the Study of Chinese Military Affairs who do read Chinese and who have seen kind of a muted Chinese write-up of what's going on here. My sensing of that, thinking of it in terms of historic great power rivalry, is China has been ratcheting up its desire to gain access to important and critical security and strategic information. This balloon, we now kind of know, has been part of a Chinese program developing over the last 3, 4, 5 years to try to find different and novel ways to collect information over America and our strategic partners as well. They're doing the same thing, we suspect, there. New and novel ways to gather better and more refined signals intelligence than they may be getting already from what we know is their severe penetration of our cyber networks and their desire to hoover up information there. So we anticipate, I think, that this balloon had sensors and a sensor suite that was designed to help them gain more fidelity, particularly in the way in which communications go on around military bases, again showing that they're trying to capture things that will enable them to be more competitive with us in the military side, if and when they should decide to take some hostile actions against our friends or partners in the region. So I think, Steve, that while this is clearly serious, in many ways the balloon is just pulling the curtain back a little bit on what's, in my observation, already been going on the U.S. military and security side. And that is a firm determination that we must up our game. We must increase the degree to which we're paying attention, to include now even refining the way our radars search the sky, not just searching for unmanned drones or piloted aircraft or even low-orbiting satellites to collect information, but these balloons. And I think we've also then signaled pretty tellingly on the part of the president that if you are so brazen as to do this, China, then we're going to take action to secure our space. And ergo, we've shot the thing down and we're trying to figure out what it actually has on it. So I think there's a little bit of embarrassment perhaps we're seeing on the part of the Chinese, but at another level they're like, game on.
Tom Lynch, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Senator Rick Scott clarifying that he never planned to cut Social Security or Medicare benefits. This after he faced attacks from all angles, including members of his own party. NTD's Melina Wisecup brings us that story.
Republicans plan to cut Social Security benefits. That's a message that Democrats honed in on prior to the midterms and continue to peddle now. President Biden even taking jabs at the GOP during his State of the Union address.
Instead of making the wealthy pay their fair share, some Republicans want Medicare and Social Security to sunset. I'm not saying it's a majority.
Biden's referring to a plan laid out by Senator Rick Scott, which calls for all federal programs to sunset in 5 years. And he says, quote, if a law is worth keeping, Congress can pass it again. This led to mounting attacks across the aisle and even within the GOP. Minority Leader Mitch McConnell saying that because of this, Scott would have trouble getting reelected in Florida.
As you recall, there was some confusion last year about what the agenda of the Republican Senate might be. There is no agenda on the part of Senate Republicans to revisit Medicare or Social Security, period.
Trump this week weighed in on Truth Social, writing, "Be careful, Rick, and most importantly, fight for Social Security and Medicare. There will be no cuts." Now Senator Scott has edited his webpage to clarify specific exceptions of Social Security, Medicare, National Security, veterans benefits, and other essential services, specifically naming Biden, Schumer, and McConnell.
Is that the president congratulates Senator Scott on joining the post-State of the Union red wave.
Scott has publicly publicly stated that he has no wish to end these programs.
I don't know one Republican that wants to reduce Social Security or Medicare benefits. We want to preserve them, and that's why we've got to figure out how we get a balanced budget here.
And this comes as Social Security is set to be insolvent in just 10 years, meaning the program will be depleted. Recently, I asked Senate Leader Chuck Schumer what Democrats' plan is for making sure this program stays solvent and doesn't run out of money, but I didn't get much of an answer other than the statement that Democrats would protect the program. Earlier this week, another reporter asked that very same question, and here's Schumer's response.
And we have some plans to make it solvent, which you'll hear from down the road. Okay?
And right now, House Republicans are working to negotiate stricter budget measures in exchange for raising that $31.4 trillion debt cap, which must be done by this summer. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
The U.S. Navy is no longer looking at the COVID-19 vaccination status of sailors before deciding to deploy them. The Navy releasing the updated guidance this week. The guidance says commanders should defer to medical providers regarding the medical readiness of personnel and that COVID-19 vaccination status is no longer a consideration, as it was for more than a year. Congress recently removed the military's vaccine requirement in the National Defense Authorization Act last year. The Navy's new guidance now says that, quote, under no circumstances shall a commander mandate that any Navy service member receive the COVID-19 vaccination. Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.